Hello, everybody. Welcome back to episode 2 of the Painting in Photoshop series. Today, I thought we were going to do maybe something fun, a little bit more like the big man Bob Ross himself, something a little bit more classic. I've got a little canvas set up. I've got a couple of grids that line up, something about the golden ratio. We kind of talked about that in the previous video. And I was thinking, you know what? I learned so much from Bob Ross. Let's make a happy little painting for Mr. Bob Ross himself. I learned so much from the guy. So yeah, stick with us. We're gonna paint some happy little clouds and some happy little trees, and maybe some mountains somewhere. Starting off with just a little bit of blue here in the background. I'm just gonna pull that all the way through till about maybe to this horizon line right there that we got set up in our grid. And then maybe I can add in just a tiniest shade of maybe like a little bit of purple here on the side. Boom, something like that. And then maybe we go a little bit lighter towards the bottom, kind of like as if it's kind of like a little bit of haze maybe over here down at the bottom, something like that. Going into our blues again, add in a tiny bit of dark to the top here, get a bit of a gradient going, you know. And we'll leave maybe one side a little bit lighter than the other side, something like that. Pull a little bit of that color over here towards the bottom. Ooh, that might be a bit much. Righto, this will be our backdrop for now. Just a couple of blues. I might just like double up the layer just to add a little bit more color to it. That's a nifty little trick when you're using like a bit of transparency in your brushes. If you just double it up and you kind of up the contrast, and it kind of like helps me keep it subtle that way. I know it's not super necessary or anything, but kind of keeps it subtle. Works for me anyways. Gonna drop in some happy little clouds just as the big man would. I've got a little fluffy brush going on, and I'm just gonna drop in a bit of a weird shape right here. Don't really want to have it to be like a cotton ball, but something like that. And now we're gonna grab this blue from the sky. We're gonna turn it just a little bit more gray, and just ooh, that's a bit much. Just with 20 opacity, kind of like 20% opacity brush, I'm just going to layer in a couple of dark hues over here. Let me switch off one of these grids so you can see a little bit better. There we go. Just going to like put that over on one side of the cloud and maybe a tiny bit towards the bottom. Grabbing a bit of a brighter shade here, maybe just a tiny smidge of an orangey lit up hue. And I'm making the brush very small. Let me zoom in a little bit, and I'm just going to drop in a couple of highlights here and there on this cloud, wherever I think the sun is shining on it brightest, which is probably around here somewhere, straight into the middle. Whoop-pow. I'm just going to use that same brush to define these lit up edges of the cloud a little bit, something along these lines. Note that this one's entirely unplanned. Like last time when I did one of these, I kind of had a photo going of kind of what I wanted it to look like a general idea. This is just like full on free rolling though, so we'll see what it turns out like. But as long as we're having fun, it's all good, right? Boom. Maybe there's like a little tiny version of this cloud hanging past him. Like maybe he's got his little brother tagging along with him. Somewhere around here. Totally. And now going into the brightest of bright shades, just a little highlight on top of the highlight. Don't want to have this everywhere, but just here and there wherever you feel like a little bit of light is striking this thing. Something like this. Still working with the same brush. Haven't really switched up my brush at all. Still this kind of like fluffy kind of thing. Oh, by the way, today's timer, I've set it to 17 minutes, so it's a bit of a shorter episode. See how we go with that. Figured I'd give that a go. Swap to a bit of a blue shade here. Drop in a little bit more of this bluish color. Alrighty, and now for the big magic trick, we're going to go over to the smudge tool, I think, and I got the strength set to 20 right now. Maybe we'll turn it to 10, boom. I'm just going to fluff up some of these parts of this cloud. Just give it a little pulls. And that should make things a little bit softer. Super easy way to make fluffy little clouds. And if we make the strength go maybe 50 is a bit much. Maybe we'll go like 30. and we start pulling, we get a more dramatic effect as if the wind is really pulling these things. Like, but it could be cool maybe with this one. Maybe we'll stretch this one out all the way. Look at him go. Look at him go. Whoa, it's being blown by the wind. This one too. Whoop-pow. Whoa, swoosh. There we go, something like that. See what it looks like. Hey, that looks pretty cool to me. Maybe we'll see how it looks on the grid. Yeah, it looks about right. We'll have it right there. And one thing I like to do sometimes when I've made a cloud is just grabbing my highlight color, which is somewhere around here, the brightest part of the cloud. Boom. And I've made a new layer, and just with a bit of a transparent brush, just gonna add in a couple of taps of that hue over the top of the cloud. Ooh, that was a bit much. But it gives us this glowy effect. See, without and with. Without, let me turn off this other grid. Without, with. So that makes it a little bit, ooh, that could work around there too. Makes it a little bit, yeah, kind of like a glowy kind of effect, which is kind of cool. I don't want that much over on that side. This is fine. Righto, so with our, that's pretty much our sky done. Let me just compile that layer. Whoop-pow, it's all set in stone now. We got one layer full of sky. I'm just going to go over and grab a rough kind of brush. Let's see, which one should we use? Pointy one. Yeah, we'll use like a pointy one. I'm just going to add in a bit of a darkish, grayish, purpley color, something along, but more on the blue side of things. Something along this, maybe. Oh, let me adjust transparency. It's a bit much, maybe. Go a little bit lighter. It's a little bit too colorful in my opinion. Somewhere in the middle of those two. And righto, and we're just gonna layer in a couple of these. Let me set the transparency to 100. A couple of these mountainy kind of shapes here. What I like to do, like I know Bob Ross always did like everything in one stroke, but he was doing things with oil paint, so you can't really delete. But the way I like to shape my mountains and rocks and stuff is I like to just make one really big shape and blob it all in there. And then once we've got our general like first shape, I like to grab a sharp brush, kind of like we just had on our actual brush. But I'm actually going to put this on the eraser right now. Let's see if we can find the same brush. I think it was this one. Yeah, there we go. And instead of just using the brush to lay in the shape, I'm actually just putting in the shape and then I'm carving out the mountain shape a little bit more specifically afterwards. That way I can add in all these little ridges and like little funky things that this mountain may or may not have. Something along those lines. Like I always find the peaks to be a little bit round when obviously it kind of depends on what your brushes are like, but I always end up with mountain shapes that are a little bit too round in my opinion, so I'm doing it this way just to get a little bit of a sharper outline, I suppose. Just got to make sure you got to clean up those edges a little bit more every now and then, but overall I kind of like this method. Look at that. That is pretty, I kind of missing a peak over here, but overall I kind of dig this shape. This is pretty cool. Oh, look at that. That's more like a rolling hill. I kind of like that. Boom. Take that same color and I'm just gonna like extend them a little bit. Something along these lines. Boom. That looks alright to me. Now, Bob Ross always kind of like smudges the bottom, but because we're like makes it hazy, but because we're working in Photoshop, we actually can just like pull all of this down and we can just paint on top of this. So I'm making a new layer and I'm just going to select all of the pixels that belong to this mountain, and let me find a rough snow-like brush. Maybe this will do. I'm just gonna borrow some color of this cloud right here, because why not? And I'm just gonna lay in, is this texture I want? Nah, that's not the texture I want. Let's try a different brush. What is this one like? Whoa, this one's huge. Make it smaller. Hey, this kind of works. And we'll use this as kind of like our highlighty tone and our highlighty snowy texture. Having a bunch of different brushes with different textures is super handy. This way, this one's like very gritty, and all these specks of snow are just kind of like falling off your brush, just like Bob Ross would have it fall off his knife when he was painting these with oil paint. But we're using Photoshop. We got to find the replacements for these, and we can just pull this snow down in kind of like a diagonal stroke wherever we want it to go. I will have it a little bit more over to the side here. Boom. Check it out, check it out. There's lots of snow over here. Maybe we can go back and paint some more rocks. We'll do that after. And as the man always would say, every highlight needs a shadow. So we're going to go over to maybe just a little bit more of a bluish shade, and we'll darken it up a little bit. And on every opposite side of where we put our highlights, we're going to just put in a little bit of the shadowy color, which is actually still kind of bright, this bright bluish hue. But we can darken it up a little bit maybe. Maybe we'll go all the way in there. Ooh, yeah, that's more like it. Sets it apart a little bit more, eh? And maybe we want to connect two of these ridges or have something interesting going on in between, so maybe we'll grab some of the shadowy color, and I'm just gonna like maybe like pull it in an arc from left to right, and maybe we'll grab our highlight color and fill this up, kind of like as if it's a bowl filled with snow. And we'll grab a couple of these highlights for just the very top ridges here. Boom. Check it out. That seems to work all right for me. One thing I like to do is to grab our mountain background color, which is this purpley kind of hue, and we're just going to grab a darker, more or less saturated hue of that, and then just go over for a second kind of row of rocky texture. Still using that same very like gritty brush, and I'm just going to layer in a couple of these maybe like differences in height and steepness of these mountains, so that kind of like creates a little bit more of a uneven pattern as you would in an actual steep mountain. Let's see how that looks like. That looks alright to me. Cool. Now that kind of looks like a Bob Ross painting already. Going into our very first brush, the one that we used for the sky, I'm just going to borrow some color of these clouds again. I'm going to set the opacity kind of low, and I'm just going to like haze up a little bit of this bottom bit right here as if there's fog rolling through these hills. Boom. Something along those lines. And maybe it would be cool if one of these is actually kind of like passing through this mountain ridge, like right there. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see. Let me grab the darker shade that we used for the clouds earlier. Still not 100% opacity. I'm still keeping it fairly light, around 40%. And I'm just kind of dropping in a couple of these fluffy clouds and let them kind of like roll over the edge of the mountains. Not everywhere, just here and there, as if it's kind of like creeping over the top and just falling over it, you know, the mountain's shoulder, something like that. Along those lines. Going into my highlight color, borrow it from the clouds. I'm just gonna touch up a couple of these fluffy things that are rolling over right there. Would you look at that? That's pretty cool. And then with the smudge tool, the one that we used earlier, I'm just gonna pull it over and across, something like that. Soften it up a little bit. Ooh, could do with a little bit more highlight, I think. Maybe something like this. Ooh, that's bright. That is super bright. But it kind of works, kind of sets it apart, gets the point across a little bit more that these are clouds coming over the hills. Something like that. Ooh, I kind of like how they're rolling off the edge here. That's cool. Boom. Righto. So that's our mountain range for now. Let's continue onwards to more like the bottom bit of this little picture. I'm not sure how we're doing for time. I'm sure I'm going to hear an alarm go off at some point. But I think we're making pretty good pace here. Just going to add a little bit more fog down here because I kind of like it. Maybe there can be a couple of separate layers. Let me just borrow some of this shadowy color from the clouds. Ooh, that needs to be a little bit darker. The closer we get to the foreground, the higher the contrast and the hues should be. So we can add in a little bit of a darker blue with a bit more hues over here at the bottom. There, these clouds are gonna roam. Boom. Borrow some of the highlight color again from the highlights from the clouds we did earlier. Layer that in somewhere like so. A little bit brighter maybe, and we're just gonna zoom in and add in some tiny little touches here with a very small brush. Whoa, look at that. Sometimes I have so much fun just painting clouds. I end up just doing clouds. I can do that for hours. I just love painting them. But we're gonna do this pretty quick because I set myself a timer, and I can't have the episode on YouTube run forever, right? So, but would you look at that? That is pretty cool. Righto. Actually, the more I keep adding these, the more I like it. Well, I might just keep going for a little bit. Hope you don't mind. Grab a darker shade. Add in some shadowy bits. And let's go a little bit more on the blue kind of side of these. Boom. These are really coming alive. I like it. I like it a lot. Alright, so that's about enough for now, I think. Let's start a new layer. We can kind of like, yeah, we'll blend the mountains together. So we got one layer for the mountains. Alright, so classic little bushes and trees and forests in the background. Let's see what we got for a brush that can kind of do that for us. We're gonna grab something. Hey, I just heard my alarm go off. We'll go for another 5 minutes, I think. So we'll just grab a little bit of green, kind of like a dull kind of green, and I'm just gonna go up here, and ooh, that's not dark enough. Hold on, I need something a little bit darker, something along this lines. Yeah, boom. I'm just gonna add in a bit of a forest down here at the bottom, something along these lines. Cool. And then with a slightly darker shade, just gonna go in for another layer where we just touch the bottom bits a little bit. That kind of works. Just gonna drop the transparency a little bit on my brush and just gonna smudge out a bit of these bottom bits and kind of try to get a feel for what the lay of the land is doing. So maybe we can up it a little bit. Boom, something along these lines, as if there's kind of like a valley down here. One side will be lit up, which will be this right side, and one side will stay dark, I think. So we'll make this left side a little bit darker, and I think we want a couple of separated trees here. So I'm just like resting down on my tablet real hard to make these like sharp trees stand out. And we want some tall ones, and we want some that are maybe not so tall, just to mix it up a little bit. But there can definitely be a couple tall ones over here. Yeah, something along those lines. And then maybe here is going to be a big patch of shade, something like that. We can definitely darken that up a little bit. Yep. Pull it across. Boom. Righto. And then maybe on this side, oh man, we got some work to do on these trees right here. I mean, they're finish, but definitely not as cool looking as our mountains. So we might have to touch those up a little bit. Maybe we can go into something like, what kind of color are we going to get? Maybe a color like this. And just on the left side of these things, we're just going to grab a different texture brush. Maybe, no, that's not quite what I'm looking for. Maybe something like this. Transparency set to high. A little bit bigger. Right up. Just gonna drop in a little bit of highlight here on some of the left of these like trees. We're gonna touch them up a little bit later, but I just want to give them a little bit more of a defined shape rather than this kind of like a children's coloring book kind of shape. So we're just gonna do that first. Maybe something like that. And we can use that same color for some trees over here. All like that. And maybe this can also kind of be a similar color for our grass down here at the bottom. And I even kind of like the texture, so we'll just roll with that, pull it all the way forward. And the closer we get to the foreground, the more yellow and green, higher in hues, brighter in hues we're going to go. So something along these lines. Boom. Cool. And drop the transparency a little bit. I want this to kind of like maybe have a little bit of shade rolling through over on this side, as if it's kind of like a rolling hill. And then maybe there's like a little valley kind of path here in the middle. Maybe we can touch that up with some brightish yellowish brown, as if there's like a little path here in the middle. Something like that. And obviously the path gets wider as it comes closer to us. Hey, that kind of works. I like how it adds a little bit of depth in it. And it's super simple trick. Doesn't need much at all. And maybe we can just touch this up a little bit just by going into a little bit of a brighter yellowy hue. I'm just going to highlight some of these rolly hills on the side. Now I got the brush set to like 20% transparency, and that way the more I keep brushing, the more highlight will appear, or in this case shadows. I just swapped to like a shadowy color. But that way it's really easy to create some illusion of depth and highlight that way, just by setting the opacity of your brush to about 20%, and then the more you hit it, the more highlights will appear. Something like that. Hey, that works. Just a couple over here, maybe in the middle, where just a bit of light strikes. Yeah. And I kind of want to have maybe a shady color. Let's zoom in a little bit for this little path. And I'm just going to grab the color that we use for the path, but turn it all the way, maybe a little bit more brown grayish. And just here and there. Gonna need some more opacity for this one. Just gonna drop in a little bit of shadowy color here. It's very subtle, but when we zoom out, it's definitely gonna make a difference. Let's turn it all the way dark, but have the opacity set to maybe 20. And then that way, we can create all these illusions of depth within this path. Something like that. Now I just want to touch up these trees just a smidge, and then after that we're going to call it finished for this episode. So I hope you enjoyed it. It's a bit of an experiment. This is episode number 2. Be sure to check out episode number 1. There's a little issue with it that you can't see the cursor, but that's fixed for this episode, so that's improvement day. And then if you like these videos, well, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and then I'll keep making these, I think, because they're super fun to make, and I hope it gets people to maybe do some drawing and painting in Photoshop. It's definitely something, if you have the tools for it. Obviously you're gonna need Photoshop and maybe like a pen tablet like I'm using, but I promise you it's worth it in the regard that it's way easier to do than even Bob Ross himself made it look with oil paint, because oil paint is super messy. Believe me, I've done it heaps of times. It's how I learned to paint, really, and it gets messy real quick. So if you're looking into something that's a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier to pick up, I would highly recommend give this a go, and then maybe next time you can paint along with me. Hey, so yeah, like I said, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment of what kind of scene I should maybe do next, and then hopefully catch you soon on episode number 3. This will be it. Check it out. It's our Bob Ross kind of landscape in Photoshop in about 20 to 30 minutes. Woo! That was a lot of fun. Catch you on the next one. Have an awesome day.